There is something about the forest at night that makes the mind go very still. Welcome to Sleepy Science. Tonight, we are going to spend a long, unhurried time in the company of bears. If you feel moved to like this video, or subscribe, or leave a comment about what topic you'd love to explore next, that means more than you know. And if you'd like to help keep these long, slow, sleepy journeys going, you can find the Sleepy Science Patreon whenever you're ready. For now, just let yourself settle. Somewhere out there, in the dark and the cold and the deep silence of an old wood, a bear is breathing slowly. And so are you. Bears have been walking this earth for a very long time. The earliest ancestors of the bear family appeared roughly 38 million years ago. Small creatures, nothing like the heavy, shambling animals we know today. They were more like weasels in those early days, light and low to the ground, moving through a world that looked nothing like ours. Over millions of years, so slowly you could never watch it happen, they grew. Their bones thickened, their skulls widened, their bodies deepened into the great broad shapes we recognize now. Evolution is patient in a way that is almost impossible to hold in your mind. 38 million years is a number you can say, but not a number you can feel. It is long before there were cities, long before there were people, long before there were even the particular ancestors from which we ourselves eventually came. And the bear family was already there, changing, slowly, in the undergrowth of an ancient world. There are 8 species of bear alive today, and they are more different from one another than most people realize. There is the polar bear, pale and enormous, built for ice. There is the sun bear, small and shy, living in the warm forests of Southeast Asia, barely reaching your hip if you stood beside one. There is the spectacled bear of South America, the only bear in the southern hemisphere, wearing pale rings around its eyes, like an old professor. There is the sloth bear, shaggy and odd-looking, more like a pile of dark fur than an animal at first glance, found in the forests of India and Sri Lanka. There is the Asiatic black bear, with its pale crescent on the chest, sometimes called the moon bear. There is the giant panda, which still surprises many people to learn, is truly a bear, and not something else entirely. And then there is the brown bear, the species with perhaps the largest range on Earth, living across Europe, Asia, and North America, including the grizzly, which is simply a regional name for the same animal, and the American black bear, perhaps the most numerous bear in the world, living in forests from coast to coast across the continent. 8 kinds of bear, 8 different answers to the same question of how to be a bear. The giant panda deserves a quiet moment of its own here, because it is one of the more quietly extraordinary animals on Earth. It eats almost nothing but bamboo. Bamboo is not very nutritious, not for a large mammal. And yet, a giant panda will spend somewhere between 10 and 16 hours a day, simply eating. It has evolved a small bony extension of the wrist, that functions almost like a thumb, a sixth digit that lets it grip the bamboo stalks with surprising dexterity. This false thumb, as it is sometimes called, is not made of the same bones as a true thumb. It developed separately, through an entirely different path, because the panda needed it, and evolution eventually found a way. There is something almost moving about that. An animal so committed to one particular food that its body slowly invented a new tool to eat it better. The panda's digestive system is still built like a carnivore's, short and quick, not well suited for processing tough plant fiber. And so it has to eat enormous amounts, just to stay alive. Always eating, always slowly, always in the rustling green heart of a bamboo grove. Brown bears are heavier in autumn than they are at any other time of year. In the weeks before winter truly settles in, they enter a period of almost frantic eating, called hyperphagia. The word comes from the Greek for excessive eating, and it describes exactly what happens. A brown bear preparing for winter might eat 20,000 calories in a single day. To put that softly into perspective, most adult humans eat somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 calories in a day. A bear in hyperphagia is eating the equivalent of several full human days of food, every single day, without slowing. It eats berries by the thousands. It eats fish pulled from cold rivers. It eats roots and nuts and insects, and whatever else the autumn forest offers. And slowly, week by week, its body thickens. A thick layer of fat builds beneath the skin, an insulating, energy-storing coat that will keep the bear alive through months of cold and darkness, without a single meal. The body knows what is coming. The body prepares. There is something ancient and trustworthy about that kind of quiet preparation. And then, the den. Bears do not simply fall asleep in the open. They choose their places carefully, or they dig. A bear might spend days selecting the right spot before ever beginning to settle in. Some bears dig dens into hillsides, scraping out a small, dark chamber, just large enough to hold themselves. Others find spaces beneath the roots of large, fallen trees, or in rock caves, or in the hollow bases of enormous old trunks. They line these spaces with grasses, leaves, bark, whatever soft and insulating material the forest provides. And then they go in, and they curl themselves, and they let the cold close over them, and they sleep. Not quite in the way we sleep. What bears do in winter is not the same as true hibernation, in the strictest scientific sense. Their body temperature does not drop as dramatically as, say, a ground squirrel's. Their heart rate slows, yes, from around 40 or 50 beats per minute, down to as few as 8. Their breathing slows. Their metabolism slows, but they can be roused, slowly and grumpily, if disturbed. Scientists sometimes call what bears do torpor, a deep winter rest, rather than a true hibernation. the distinction matters less than the image. A bear, curled in the dark, surrounded by cold and quiet, breathing so slowly you could wait a long time between breaths. What is quietly extraordinary about this sleep is what happens inside the body while it lasts. A bear can go 5 to 7 months without eating, drinking, or passing waste of any kind. In a human, fasting for that long would cause severe muscle loss. The body, lacking fuel, would begin breaking down its own muscle tissue. But bears in torpor do not lose significant muscle mass. Something in their biology has solved this problem in a way that scientists are still working to fully understand. The bear's body recycles its own waste products in a kind of elegant internal loop, using them to rebuild proteins rather than losing them. This discovery has led researchers to wonder whether something in bear biology might one day help people who lose muscle mass due to illness or injury, or long periods of immobility. The sleeping bear, still and dark in its hillside den, is quietly solving a problem that medicine has not yet solved. A mother bear does something even more remarkable. She gives birth during winter torpor. The cubs arrive in January or February, in the dark of the den, while the mother is still in her deep winter rest. They are born very small, weighing only about half a pound each, which seems almost impossible given how large the mother is. They are born hairless, blind, and entirely dependent. And the mother, half sleeping, nourishes them with her rich milk, which is very high in fat, giving them what they need to grow, while she herself goes on burning her stored fat to sustain them all. By the time spring arrives and the family emerges from the den, the cubs have grown considerably. They stumble out into the light for the first time, small and wobbly, blinking at a world they have never seen. The mother, lean and hungry after months of sustaining them, leads them immediately toward food. The slow miracle of winter birth, entirely in the dark, entirely in sleep, is one of the quieter wonders of the animal world. Bears are not the solitary creatures they are sometimes described as. Or rather, they are often solitary, but not always, and not entirely. Brown bears are known to gather in large numbers at salmon rivers during the annual salmon run. At places like Brooks Falls in Alaska, dozens of bears might gather on the same stretch of river. Over the course of a season, they stand in the rushing water or perch on rocks above the falls, watching for salmon leaping upstream. And the social dynamics that emerge in these gatherings are more complex and more civil than you might expect from animals with that kind of size and power. There is a loose hierarchy. Older, larger, more experienced bears tend to get the best fishing spots, the places where the salmon come closest, the rocks with the best vantage. Younger or smaller bears wait their turn. Serious fights are relatively rare. Most disagreements are settled with posture, with a slow turn of the head with a particular way of standing that communicates everything without a single sound. Bears have a social language that is subtle and quiet, and almost entirely invisible to us. The sense of smell that a bear carries through the world is almost beyond easy description. A dog's sense of smell is often cited as remarkable, and it is. But a bear's sense of smell is estimated to be roughly 7 times stronger than a dog's, and perhaps 2,000 times more sensitive than a human's. A bear can smell food from 20 miles away, under the right conditions. It can smell where another bear walked days ago. It can smell a carcass beneath several feet of snow. It can smell the difference between familiar individuals from the chemical traces left on bark, where they rubbed their bodies. The world a bear inhabits is largely invisible to us. A world written in scent, layered and rich and constantly shifting, full of information about who passed through, and when, and in what direction, and what they had been eating. The nose of a bear is so large, partly because of the extraordinary surface area of scent-detecting tissue inside it. The nasal cavity is enormous relative to the skull, a vast and delicate instrument, tuned to the 1,000 languages that the air carries. Bears also have excellent hearing. Their ears are rounded and relatively small, compared to some animals, but the range of frequencies they can detect extends well beyond what humans can hear. They can hear high-pitched sounds that fall outside our range entirely, which is one reason they are often aware of a person's approach, long before the person knows a bear is there. Their eyesight, by contrast, is closer to human level, perhaps slightly weaker in terms of fine detail, but they have good color vision, which is somewhat unusual among large mammals. Many large herbivores and predators see the world in more limited color. Bears, with their need to identify ripe berries and edible plants among vast tangles of vegetation, may have developed color vision, partly as a foraging tool. A ripe berry is a different color than an unripe one, and to a bear, that difference matters. Bears communicate in ways that leave marks on the landscape. One of the most common is the rub tree. A bear will find a particular tree, often a large conifer, and rub its back and shoulders against it, leaving behind hair and scent from glands along its back and sides. These rub trees serve as message boards, gathering points of information in the landscape. Other bears come to the same tree and rub in the same spot, and sniff what was left there, and leave their own scent in return. The height at which a bear rubs communicates something about its size. A very large bear rubs high on the trunk. Smaller bears, coming later, can read how large the previous visitor was by where the marks sit on the bark. Some of these rub trees have been used by generations of bears. Over many decades, the bark worn smooth and dark, with the accumulated contact of many lives. A tree standing quietly in a forest, holding the memory of 100 bears. polar bears are so different from their relatives that they feel almost like a separate question entirely. They evolved from brown bears, relatively recently in evolutionary terms, somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago. In that time, natural selection reshaped them dramatically. Their fur, which appears white, is actually hollow and translucent. Each hair shaft is clear and colorless, and the white appearance comes from the way the hollow shafts scatter and reflect light. Beneath that fur, the polar bear's skin is black, absorbing the heat of sunlight and holding it close to the body. Their paws are enormous, broad and slightly webbed between the toes, serving as paddles when they swim and as snowshoes when they walk across sea ice. Polar bears are classified as marine mammals because so much of their lives is spent at sea, swimming between ice floes, hunting seals at breathing holes, living in an intimate relationship with frozen water. They have been documented swimming continuously, for days at a time, crossing open stretches of ocean that would exhaust any other land animal. The polar bear's relationship with the cold is one of the most complete adaptations in the mammal world. Their fat layer alone can be 4 inches thick in places. The hollow hairs trap air and create an insulating buffer between the body and the environment. Their broad paws have small bumps on the pads that grip the ice and prevent slipping, natural crampons grown into the skin itself. They can detect the scent of a seal's breathing hole through nearly 3 feet of solid ice. They will wait motionless at these holes for hours, sometimes longer, barely moving, barely breathing, waiting for the moment the seal surfaces. Patience is a survival skill for the polar bear. The ability to hold perfectly still in the cold, waiting, without giving in to movement or impatience, is what keeps them alive. There is a kind of meditative quality to that stillness that is difficult to name, but easy to imagine. Polar bears are also, among all the bear species, the most carnivorous. Brown bears and black bears are true omnivores, eating a great deal of plant material, alongside fish and insects and the occasional larger animal. But the polar bear's diet is almost entirely meat. Ringed seals are their primary prey, though they will also take bearded seals, walruses when opportunity arises, and even beluga whales, caught in the ice. The high-fat diet of seal meat and blubber is exactly what their bodies require in one of the coldest environments on Earth. Fat is the most calorie-dense fuel a body can run on, and in the Arctic, calories are everything. A polar bear that misses a meal is not merely hungry. It is expending its reserves, drawing down the insulating layer that stands between it and the cold. Sun bears are, in almost every way, the opposite of the polar bear. They are the smallest of all the bears, the size of a large dog, weighing somewhere between 60 and 140 pounds. They live in the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia, in Borneo, Sumatra, Malaysia, and the surrounding region. Their fur is short and dark, suited to a climate that never sees snow. And they have something remarkable on their tongue. The sun bear's tongue is extraordinarily long, sometimes reaching 8 or 9 inches, and it uses this tongue to extract honey from beehives and insects from logs and tree trunks. It is sometimes called the honey bear for exactly this reason. It finds a tree with a beehive inside, tears it open with its strong curved claws, and then works its long tongue deep into the combs to pull out the honey and the larvae within. Bees sting it, but the thick fur on its face provides some protection. A sun bear raiding a beehive in the cool of a forest morning is a creature entirely in its element, perfectly built for a life of patient sweetness. The sloth bear of South Asia has a dietary specialty that seems almost improbable. It eats termites, not as an occasional supplement to a broader diet, but as a primary food source. The sloth bear has evolved a suite of physical adaptations specifically for this purpose. It has a long lower lip and a deeply hollowed palate, which together form a kind of natural vacuum tube. It has missing front upper teeth that leave a gap for sucking. It closes its nostrils when feeding, a voluntary action that keeps the termite dust from getting in. When it finds a termite mound, it digs into it with its powerful curved claws, then places its muzzle into the hole and creates a powerful vacuum with its lips and palate, sucking up the insects in a loud, rushing inhalation. The sound of a sloth bear eating termites can be heard from 200 meters away. It is a bizarre and wonderful adaptation, a bear that has become, in its own quiet way, a living vacuum cleaner, tuned precisely to the frequency of termite mounds. The spectacled bear is the only surviving member of a once diverse family of South American short-faced bears. Its relatives are all gone now, extinct since the end of the last ice age, leaving the spectacled bear as a kind of living remnant, the last of an ancient lineage that once roamed the whole of the continent. It lives in the Andes, at elevations that many animals avoid, climbing high into cloud forests, and even into the Paramo, the high-altitude grasslands above the tree line. The spectacled bear is largely herbivorous, one of the most plant-eating of all the bears, with bromeliads, orchid bulbs, and cactus fruits forming much of its diet. The pale markings around its eyes give it an expression of mild and permanent surprise, as if it has just noticed something interesting in the mist. Each spectacled bear's face markings are unique, like a fingerprint, different from every other individual. In a world where we often think of animals as interchangeable within a species, there is something quieting about that uniqueness. Each face distinct, each animal itself and no one else. Bears are intelligent animals, a fact that is sometimes overlooked, because their intelligence does not often express itself in the ways we expect. They do not use tools in the way that crows or primates do. But their capacity for memory, for spatial reasoning, for problem solving, is genuinely remarkable. A bear in a national park will learn, sometimes within a single encounter, how to open a particular type of container. It will remember a berry patch or a salmon river. From year to year, navigating back to it across vast distances, with what appears to be a precise and detailed internal map. Brown bears have been observed using stones as tools in a rudimentary way, picking them up and rubbing them across their faces, apparently to scratch an itch. Sun bears have been documented making facial expressions in response to the expressions of other sun bears, a behavior called facial mimicry that was previously thought to be limited to great apes and humans. The inner lives of bears are likely richer and stranger than we have given them credit for. There is a quality to the way bears move that is worth sitting with for a moment. They walk with a rolling, unhurried gait, placing their whole foot flat on the ground, heel first and then toes, the way humans walk. This is called plantigrade locomotion, and it is relatively uncommon among large mammals, most of which walk on their toes. Dogs and cats walk on their toes. Horses walk on what are essentially their middle toenails. But bears walk the way we walk, with the whole foot, which gives them an almost human-like footprint, and an almost human quality to their upright stance when they rise on their hind legs. A standing bear is startlingly tall. A large brown bear standing fully upright can reach 8 or 9 feet. From a distance, the silhouette of a standing bear can be remarkably difficult to distinguish from a standing human. This is not a coincidence that has gone unnoticed. Many cultures around the world have stories of bears as transformed people, or people as transformed bears, the boundary between species, blurred by that uncanny posture. The relationship between bears and human beings goes very deep in time. Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives, appear to have had a particular relationship with cave bears that was complex and perhaps ritualistic. Cave bear skulls have been found in arranged positions in Neanderthal sites that suggest intentional placement rather than casual discard. What this means exactly, no one can say for certain. Whether it represents something like reverence or simply a practical use of available material, the bones cannot tell us fully. But the arrangement itself suggests that even before modern humans arrived in Europe, our closest relatives were paying a kind of attention to the bear that went beyond simple predator and prey. Cave bears themselves were enormous. They were larger than most brown bears today, with males sometimes weighing over 1,000 pounds. They lived in the cave systems of Europe and left behind extraordinary accumulations of bones. In chambers deep underground, generations upon generations of them, dying in the dark. The caves still hold their bones. Some of those caves are still found. Some of those bones still carry the claw marks of ancient bears on the walls above them. indigenous cultures across the Northern Hemisphere have long held the bear in a place of deep significance. In many First Nations traditions of North America, the bear is a healer, a symbol of strength used in the service of medicine, rather than in the service of war. Bear clans exist among the Haudenosaunee, among the Anishinaabe, among many others, with their own responsibilities and honors within the community. In Siberian cultures, the bear was addressed as a relative, as an elder, sometimes as grandfather or grandmother, a kinship term that reflects a deep sense of connection, rather than distance. In Norse mythology, the berserkers, warriors of legendary ferocity, were said to wear bear skins and to channel something of the bear's nature in battle. The word berserker may itself derive from the Old Norse words for bear and shirt, a bear coat, a warrior clothed in the spirit of the animal. Across vast distances of geography and time, the bear recurs in the imaginative life of human beings as something more than just an animal. Something related, something known, something that stirs a recognition that is older than any language we have for it. The American black bear is, in many ways, the bear most people in North America are most likely to encounter. There are estimated to be between 800,000 and 1 million American black bears on the continent, the largest population of any bear species in the world. Despite their name, they come in a remarkable range of colors. In the eastern forests, they are usually black, but in the west, they shade through chocolate brown and cinnamon, and even a pale cream blonde. The so-called Kermode bear or spirit bear of British Columbia, a white-coated black bear that occurs in a small coastal population and is considered sacred by the Tsimshian people. Black bears are excellent climbers. Even large adults can scale trees with surprising speed, which is a useful thing to know, because their cubs take to the trees instinctively. When threatened, sometimes waiting in the canopy for hours until the coast is clear below. A black bear cub in a tree is one of the better hidden things. In the forest, perfectly still, watching everything from above. Bears have a remarkable sense of spatial memory. A female brown bear in Alaska may have a home range of several hundred square miles. A male's range may be larger still. Within that range, the bear knows the location of every significant food source, every good fishing spot, every reliable berry patch, every useful denning area. This knowledge builds over years, accumulated gradually through experience, held in the bear's memory, with a precision that allows it to navigate across vast and complex terrain without apparent difficulty. Young bears learn from their mothers, following her through the landscape for 1 to 3 years, while they absorb the geography of their home territory. Much of what a bear knows is inherited knowledge, passed down through generations of mothers and cubs, walking the same ridgelines, crossing the same rivers, visiting the same slopes when the berries ripen. The landscape, to a bear, is a kind of library, every corner of it annotated, with memory and meaning. Bears are also capable of play in ways that are unmistakably joyful. Cubs wrestle endlessly, tumbling over one another with an enthusiasm that looks for all the world like fun. But adult bears play too. Brown bears in Alaska have been filmed sliding down snowy hillsides, repeatedly climbing back up and sliding down again, apparently for no other reason than the pleasure of it. Polar bears have been observed playing tug-of-war, with pieces of kelp in the water. Black bears have been watched batting pine cones around, in a way that has no obvious survival purpose. The distinction between play and purpose blurs in bears, the same way it sometimes blurs in us. There is something settling about that. A creature that plays is a creature with something like a surplus of energy, something like curiosity, something like inner life that extends beyond simple need. The bear sliding down the hill is not surviving. It is simply, quietly, delighting in the sensation of motion and cold and speed. A bear's paws are extraordinary instruments. The front paws carry 5 curved claws that can vary enormously between species. A grizzly bear's claws are long and relatively straight, suited to digging roots and ground squirrels from the earth. A black bear's claws are shorter and more curved, suited to climbing trees. A polar bear's claws are short and thick and very strong, suited to gripping ice and hauling seals. The pads of a bear's foot are thick and tough, able to cross rocky terrain and icy ground without apparent discomfort. In spring, when a bear first emerges from the den, the old skin on its paws often peels away to reveal fresh pink skin beneath, softer and more sensitive. The bear's feet for those first few weeks of spring are new. They feel the world freshly, tenderly, with a sensitivity that will harden again as the season advances. To emerge from winter with new feet, walking for the first time on new skin, across the cold, still thawing earth of early spring is a beginning, worth imagining. Bears eat a startling variety of foods, and the diversity of their diet varies enormously depending on the season and the location. In spring, a brown bear emerging from the den may focus on green shoots and grasses, the first fresh plant matter of the year, easy to digest and full of protein. It might seek out the carcasses of animals that died over the winter, a useful if grim supplement. By summer, the diet broadens to include insects, ant larvae dug from logs, bees' nests raided for honey and grubs, alongside roots, tubers, and the first soft berries. In regions with salmon, the summer and early autumn salmon run becomes the central event of the year. And by late autumn, the focus is almost entirely on calorie density, eating the richest food available, as quickly as possible, before the cold makes it all disappear. The annual rhythm of a bear's diet is a calendar written in food, each season with its own particular gifts and its own particular demands. The salmon and the bear are connected in a way that extends far beyond the obvious moment of the catch. When a bear catches a salmon, it often carries it some distance from the river before eating. The remains of the fish, the bones and the skin and the parts the bear leaves behind, decompose in the forest. The nitrogen and phosphorus in those fish bodies enters the soil and feeds the trees. In forests near salmon rivers, scientists have found the chemical signature of ocean origin nutrients in the wood of conifers, growing far from the water's edge. The salmon carried nutrients from the ocean upriver when they migrated. The bear carried those nutrients into the forest when it brought its catch to eat among the trees. And the trees used those nutrients to grow. The bear is not merely a predator in this system. It is a carrier, a messenger, a kind of living bridge between the ocean and the forest. A forest near a salmon river is partly made of sea, and the bear is how it got there. Female bears, as mothers, are famously protective. The phrase mother bear has become a common metaphor in human language for fierce, instinctive protectiveness, and it is not misapplied. A female bear with cubs is one of the more intense presences in the natural world. She will interpose herself between her cubs and any threat, regardless of the size of that threat, regardless of the risk to herself. She is also, in most situations, the primary teacher her cubs will ever have. She teaches them which plants to eat, where to find them, how to fish, where the safe crossings are, where the dangers lie. The knowledge she passes on is not instinct alone, though instinct plays its part. It is accumulated and transmitted knowledge, cultural in a quiet way, handed from mother to cub, across generations. A bear's intelligence is partly in its blood and partly in the long, slow education of walking beside its mother through the world. The sounds bears make are surprisingly varied and expressive. They huff and blow through their noses as an expression of alarm or irritation. They make low, rumbling moans that can communicate contentment or mild unease. Mother bears and cubs communicate with each other through a repertoire of soft sounds, humming and whimpering and gentle moaning, sounds that suggest a rich emotional exchange between parent and young. Cubs vocalize frequently, and their distress calls are high and insistent, the kind of sound a mother bear responds to immediately. Adult bears also produce a kind of low, resonant huffing when they discover something interesting or alarming, a sound that carries their attention and uncertainty in equal measure. The dramatic roaring of bears in films and television is somewhat exaggerated. Real bears are often much quieter than that, communicating through body posture, through subtle sounds, through the language of presence and restraint that is easy to miss if you are not paying the right kind of attention. Grizzly bears, the brown bears of the North American interior, get their name from the frosted or grizzled appearance of their fur. The tips of their guard hairs are often lighter than the base, giving them a silver-dusted look in certain lights, especially on the back and shoulders. A large grizzly standing in the morning light can look as though it has been touched by frost, the tips of its fur catching the sun in a pale shimmer. Their shoulder hump, which is one of the easiest ways to tell them from black bears, is a mass of muscle attached to the spine, developed through years of digging. Grizzlies dig constantly. They dig for ground squirrels and roots and moth larvae, for bulbs and tubers, for anything edible that the earth is hiding. They can excavate a ground squirrel burrow in a few minutes, moving a surprising amount of earth with a speed and efficiency that reflects a lifetime of practice. The hump is built by this labor, grown through every spring's rooting and digging, a physical record of all the effort it has made to eat. Bears have a rich and complicated relationship with one another, even outside of those salmon-run gatherings. They communicate across the landscape through a network of scent marks and rubbed trees that allow individuals to know who is in the area without ever meeting. A bear may avoid another bear's territory for years based solely on this scent information, never needing an actual confrontation to know where the boundaries lie. When two bears do meet, the interaction is often more nuanced than a simple hierarchy of dominance. They read each other through body language, through posture and ear position, and the direction of the gaze. They may circle one another slowly, taking in scent, assessing. Most of these encounters end without violence. One bear moves away, the other holds its ground, and the landscape absorbs the exchange without keeping score. Bears are, despite their reputation, genuinely conflict-averse. They prefer, in most circumstances, to avoid trouble rather than seek it. A bear's teeth tell the story of its diet. The large canine teeth at the front of the jaw are shared by all the bears, inherited from carnivorous ancestors. But the molars at the back of the jaw are broad and flat in most species, suited to grinding plant material. A bear's mouth is a compromise, built for both the tearing of meat and the crushing of vegetation, an omnivore's toolkit, assembled piece by piece over millions of years of evolution. The panda's molars are especially broad and flat, large grinding surfaces, suited to crushing the tough fibers of bamboo. The polar bear's teeth lean the other way, sharper and more carnivore-like, suited to holding slippery seal flesh. Each species' teeth are a quiet autobiography, the record of what its ancestors ate, And what it eats now? Written in enamel, in the jaw of a living animal. Bears have an interesting and somewhat complicated relationship with their own intelligence and curiosity. They investigate new things with a thoroughness that reflects genuine curiosity. A new object in their environment will be approached cautiously at first, circled, sniffed from several angles, perhaps touched with a paw, or briefly held in the mouth. Only when the bear has gathered enough information will it relax or lose interest. This investigative quality is part of why bears get into trouble in areas near human habitation. They smell something interesting, they investigate it, and if the interesting thing is food, or something associated with food, they engage with it fully and competently, learning quickly how to access it. Bears that learn to raid garbage almost never forget. The memory is too clear, the reward too consistent. The same is true of bird feeders and fruit trees and outdoor refrigerators and the countless other things that smell to a bear of exactly what it needs. A bear's intelligence is always in the service of survival. It is a practical intelligence, applied, immediate, and very difficult to outwit. Once it is applied to something the bear actually wants, the hibernation cycle, or the winter torpor, to use the more precise term, is triggered not by temperature alone, but by a combination of signals. Day length matters enormously. As the days shorten in autumn, the bear's body responds to the changing light with a cascade of hormonal changes that prepare it for winter sleep. Food abundance matters too. In years when food is plentiful, bears may enter the den later, having accumulated more fat. In lean years, they may enter earlier, leaner and less well prepared, for the long fast ahead. The decision of when to enter the den is not a conscious choice exactly, but neither is it purely mechanical. It is responsive, sensitive to the particular conditions of that particular year, in that particular place, in that particular bear's life. When spring returns, the animal emerges along a gradient of readiness. Some bears are active and hungry within days. Others linger in or near the den for a week or more, groggy and slow, letting the warmth and light call them gradually back to the world of moving and eating. The bear and the constellation of stars that we call the Great Bear, Ursa Major, have been connected in human imagination for a very long time. The constellation is one of the oldest named star patterns on record, appearing in the mythology of ancient Greece, of ancient Mesopotamia, of the indigenous peoples of North America, of Siberian cultures, of Arctic peoples, in an extraordinary range of traditions that developed without contact with one another. That the same stars should be associated with a bear across so many separate cultures is one of the quieter puzzles of human history. Some scholars have suggested that the connection may be extraordinarily old, originating with a common ancestral culture more than 15,000 years ago, and preserved as people migrated across the globe. If so, the Great Bear turning slowly overhead is a story we have been telling for as long as we have been telling stories. The bear in the sky, and the bear in the forest, and the people looking up at both, connected across a span of time, almost impossible to hold in the mind at once. Bears can swim very well, most species of them. Brown bears will swim rivers readily and have been documented swimming across open water to reach islands. Black bears swim comfortably and are sometimes seen crossing lakes or island hopping in the coastal areas of the Pacific Northwest. And polar bears, of course, are the great swimmers of the family. A polar bear's front paws pull it through the water with a kind of slow and powerful dog paddle, the back legs trailing, the great body riding high in the water, on its layer of fat. There is film footage of polar bears swimming in the open ocean, with what appears to be complete equanimity, no urgency, no apparent distress, just the slow rhythmic pull of the paws and the horizon ahead. They can hold their breath underwater and dive to catch prey. They use the water the way other predators use grassland, as a medium, a territory, a place where hunting is possible and presence is natural. The lifespan of a wild bear depends heavily on species and circumstance. American black bears in the wild commonly live to between 20 and 30 years. Brown bears often live 20 to 25 years in the wild, sometimes longer. Polar bears typically live between 20 and 25 years in the wild, though conditions in the Arctic are becoming increasingly difficult. In captivity, with consistent food and veterinary care, bears often live considerably longer. The oldest known captive bear on record was a brown bear who lived to be over 40 years old, which by any measure is a long and full life. Over the course of those years, a bear accumulates an enormous amount of experience, a detailed and specific knowledge of its home range, a memory of good seasons and hard ones, a collection of solutions and strategies built up over decades. An old bear is in some meaningful sense a wise bear carrying more maps, more memories, more learned responses to the world than a younger one. The panda's history with extinction is long and close. Giant pandas once lived across a much larger range in China, south into what is now Vietnam and Myanmar. Fossil records show that their range shrank dramatically over the past 2 million years, driven by climate change, habitat loss, and the expansion of human populations. By the 20th century, they were reduced to a few isolated mountain ranges in central China, surviving in bamboo forests, where the human presence was thinnest. Conservation efforts, beginning in the 1980s and intensifying through the decades since, have gradually stabilized the wild population. The giant panda was reclassified from endangered to vulnerable in 2016, a quiet but real marker of progress. in one of the longer conservation stories of our time. There are estimated to be around 1,800 giant pandas in the wild today. Not many, for a species that once ranged across an entire country, but more than there might have been if certain choices had not been made. The panda's survival is not a given. It is a decision made again and again by people who chose to pay attention. Brown bears in parts of Europe are showing a pattern of recovery. That tells a similarly hopeful story. They were hunted to extinction in the British Isles around 1,500 years ago, driven out of their last refuges by a combination of hunting and habitat loss. In Scandinavia, in the Carpathians, in parts of the Alps and the Apennines, small populations persisted, sometimes barely. With legal protection and the recovery of forested areas, those populations have grown. Bears are now moving into areas of Western Europe, where they have not been seen for generations. In recent decades, individual bears have been sighted in Germany, Austria, Italy, and Slovenia, crossing borders on paws that follow the same old routes their ancestors once walked. The landscape changed, and then the landscape changed again, and the bear, patient in its way, is returning to places it was taken from. The moon bear of Asia, the Asiatic black bear, wears its pale crescent marking on the chest, bright against the dark fur. In some individuals, the crescent is narrow and faint. In others, it is broad and bright, almost luminous in the dark of a forest. These bears live across a wide range of Asian habitats, from forested mountains in Russia and China to tropical forests in Southeast Asia and the Himalayas. They are skilled climbers, probably the most arboreal of the larger bear species, spending significant time in trees and sometimes building rough platforms in the branches by pulling branches inward to create a resting surface. These tree platforms are the bear equivalent of a bed, assembled each time from the available materials left in the branches. As the bear moves on, there is something almost domestic about that, a bear making itself a place to rest, high in the canopy of a mountain forest, with care and intention, before lying down, in the leaves of its own making. Bears have played a role in human commerce and culture that is sometimes dark to consider. Bear bile farming in parts of Asia remains an ongoing welfare concern, with bears held in small cages for the extraction of bile used in traditional medicine. Bear baiting, in which bears were forced to fight dogs for entertainment, was once a popular spectacle in England and elsewhere. Banned in Britain only in 1835. Dancing bears, trained through painful methods and kept in chains, were once common street performers across Europe and Asia. The last of these performing bears in Europe were retired to sanctuaries in the early years of the 21st century. A slow and uneven process of reckoning with a very old practice. These histories are worth holding alongside the other things we know about bears, not to dwell in them, but because they are part of the full story of how human beings have related to this particular animal. The bear has been revered, hunted, worshipped, tortured, conserved, and watched with quiet wonder. All of those things in the same centuries, often by the same cultures. Bear fur is dense and layered, in a way that provides remarkable insulation. There are two layers in the fur of most bears. An outer coat of longer, coarser guard hairs that shed water and protect against abrasion, and a dense, soft, woolly undercoat that traps air and holds heat close to the skin. In winter, this undercoat is thickest, built up over the autumn months, to provide maximum insulation against the cold. In spring, as the weather warms, the thick undercoat sheds in patches, a seasonal process that can make a bear in late spring look somewhat ragged. It is not a graceful transition. A bear in the process of shedding its winter coat can look disheveled and almost moth-eaten, clumps of fur hanging loose, the shorter summer coat visible beneath. By midsummer, the coat is complete again, sleek and whole, and the bear, in its summer fur, looks entirely itself again. Seasons written on the body, the fur keeping count of winter gone and summer arrived, the animal renewing itself with the turning of the year. The giant panda's bamboo forests are among the most biologically rich habitats in China. The Minshan and Qinling mountain ranges, where most wild pandas live today, are home to an enormous diversity of species, from snow leopards and golden snub-nosed monkeys to hundreds of species of birds. When the panda is protected, the entire ecosystem benefits. This is a principle that conservationists call the umbrella species effect. A species that requires large, healthy, intact habitat to survive will, if protected, protect by extension all the other species that share that habitat. The panda, eating its bamboo in the mountain forest, holds the whole community in place around it. Its existence makes space for everything else to exist too. A bear that eats nothing but bamboo and spends 16 hours a day doing it is, in its unhurried way, sustaining a world. If you have ever seen a bear fishing, or footage of one, you may have noticed something about the way it holds itself at the water's edge. There is a stillness, a concentrated patience that mirrors, in some odd way, the practice of someone who has been meditating for a long time. The bear stands in the current, or beside a falls, or at the lip of a shallow pool. Its eyes track the movement of the fish in a way that is difficult to observe directly because the bear's gaze is too quiet to follow easily. And then, without apparent warning, the paw comes down, or the jaws, and the fish is there, or it is not. A successful catch is met with what looks like satisfaction. The bear wading to the bank, the salmon hanging from the jaw. A miss is met with something that looks indistinguishable from patience. The bear simply waits again, feet in the cold water, eyes on the river. You could learn something from that, from the bear's way of trying and not succeeding, and not abandoning the effort, from the quality of attention it brings to the water, still and open, and entirely in the moment of the river. Bears have contributed to science in ways that are sometimes unexpected. The study of bear hibernation, as mentioned earlier, has yielded insights into muscle preservation that may one day benefit human medicine. But there is also research into bear bone density. Human bones, when a person is confined to bed rest or a reduced gravity environment, begin to lose density relatively quickly. The bones of hibernating bears do not show the same kind of loss. They maintain their structural integrity through months of near total inactivity, in ways that human bones simply do not. Understanding how bears maintain bone density during torpor may inform treatments for osteoporosis, for bone loss related to long-term illness, and perhaps even for the challenges of long-duration spaceflight. The sleeping bear, curled in its hillside in December, holds biological secrets that may one day carry human beings to other worlds. The connections between the living world and the world of human knowledge and need are more intricate and more surprising than we tend to imagine. In some parts of Alaska and Western Canada, bears and wolves share the same rivers and forests, in a relationship of complicated tolerance. Wolves and grizzlies compete for food. A bear may drive wolves from a carcass through sheer size. A wolf pack may mob a bear and keep it from eating something they killed. But they also coexist, sometimes for long periods, in the same valleys, following the same seasonal rhythms, eating the same salmon and elk and berries, in a loose and dynamic equilibrium. Where both species exist together, the land is often healthier. Large predators, in proximity to one another, create what ecologists call a landscape of fear, a situation in which prey animals do not linger too long in any one place, and therefore do not overgraze any single area. The presence of the predators keeps the whole system moving, and moving systems tend to be healthy systems. The bear and the wolf, occupying the same dark forest, are part of the same story, and that story keeps the forest from collapsing into stillness. The bear's sense of time is a fascinating thing to speculate about. It has been demonstrated that bears can learn to associate particular times of year with particular foods. They know, in some embodied way, when the berries will be ripe, when the salmon will run, when the moths will gather on the mountainsides. They move toward these resources before they arrive, anticipating them, arriving roughly at the right time. This is not quite the same thing as a human understanding of time, with its clocks and calendars but it is a form of temporal intelligence, a body that knows the year's shape, that carries the cycle of seasons in its blood and bone and hunger. There is something calming about that image of a creature whose whole body is tuned to the rhythm of the year, moving through the world, in time with something larger than itself. The word bear itself has an interesting etymology. In Proto-Indo-European, the root language, from which most European languages eventually descended, there appears to have been a taboo against speaking the animal's true name. The bear was considered powerful enough, sacred enough, or simply too dangerous in some conceptual way, that speaking its name directly might bring unwanted attention. And so a euphemism developed. The Germanic peoples began calling it simply the brown one. Bear, from the Proto-Germanic baro, meaning the brown thing. The Russian word for bear, medved, means something like honey knower. The Latin word ursus, preserved in the scientific family name Ursidae, is ancient, but possibly itself a replacement for an older name that has since been lost. In many languages, the bear was too large to name directly. It was always called something else, something safer, something sideways. Perhaps the most ancient compliment, that a thing is too significant to approach by its real name and must always be met a little obliquely. Among North American indigenous peoples, the bear ceremony was a common and widespread practice. When a bear was hunted and killed, it was often addressed with respect and gratitude, apologized to, and given a ceremonial burial, or at least a careful treatment of its remains. The belief that the bear's spirit must be honored in order for the relationship between the people and the animal world to remain in balance reflects a cosmology in which humans and animals are kin, and in which the taking of a life carries responsibility. This is not sentimentality. It is a sophisticated framework for thinking about the relationship between human beings and the living world they depend on. The bear, in these traditions, is not merely an animal. It is a person of another kind, deserving of the same consideration one would give to any other kind of person. The eyes of a bear are small relative to the size of the head. Set deep in the fur, they can appear dark and fathomless. At a distance, hard to read, but in photographs taken close enough to show the iris in detail, bear eyes often have a warm brown depth to them. That is not what you might expect. The expression in those eyes is difficult to interpret precisely because we tend to map human expressions onto animal faces and often misread them. But there is a quality of attention in a bear's gaze that is undeniable. When a bear looks at something, it is really looking, not scanning mechanically, not filtering for threats only, but attending with a quality that feels, from the outside, like genuine interest. You have perhaps been watched by a bear, or perhaps you have only seen it in film or photograph. Either way, there is something in that gaze that communicates a particular kind of presence. A being that is there and knows it is there, and is also aware that you are there too. The spectacled bear has an especially interesting diet that includes something most people never think of a bear eating. Bromeliads, the spiky, exotic-looking plants, related to the pineapple, form a significant part of its diet. The spectacled bear tears the tough outer leaves away to reach the soft, pale heart of the plant, which is tender and sweet. It is a food source that requires work to access, but delivers reliable nutrition in a landscape where other foods may be seasonal and unreliable. This bear has also been observed eating orchid bulbs, cactus flesh, honey, small animals, and the soft hearts of palm trees. It navigates a vertical landscape, moving up and down through different elevation zones, as food availability shifts with the seasons, carrying its dietary flexibility through a mosaic of habitats. The Andes is not an easy place to live. The spectacled bear makes it look, if not easy, then at least perfectly manageable. Bears are among the relatively few large mammals that appear to show something like play behavior in adulthood. Most animals play when young and largely stop when they reach maturity. Play is costly in terms of energy and attention, and evolution tends to select against behaviors that do not serve a survival purpose. But large-brained animals often retain play behavior into adulthood. Dolphins play, crows play, primates play, and bears, in certain circumstances, clearly play. What play does for the brain of an adult animal is not fully understood. It may maintain cognitive flexibility. It may relieve stress. It may simply be something that brains of a certain complexity do naturally when conditions allow. The bear sliding down the snowy slope and climbing back up to do it again may not know why it is doing it, any more than we always know why we choose to do the things we find enjoyable. It just does it, again and again, until the hill grows thin of snow or the mood passes. The process of a bear finding its den is not always a straightforward search. Some bears use the same den for multiple years, returning each autumn to the same hillside, the same hollow, the same familiar dark chamber. Others move to a new site each year, either by choice or because conditions have changed. Young bears denning for the first time must find or create a suitable space on their own. This first solo winter is one of the most dangerous periods in a young bear's life, not because of any single acute threat, but because of the cumulative difficulty of choosing correctly, without the guide of a mother's experience. A den that floods in midwinter, or that is discovered by a larger bear, or that is simply too shallow to hold warmth, can be fatal. Survival in the first solo winter is in some ways a comprehensive exam on everything the young bear has learned in its 2 or 3 years at its mother's side. The ones that pass it carry forward a competence that will serve them for the rest of their lives. The bear in winter, still and dark in its den, is not entirely unaware. There is evidence that hibernating bears may dream. Their brains, during torpor, show electrical activity that is not entirely like the deep, slow waves of dreamless sleep. Whether this represents something we would recognize as dreaming is impossible to know from the outside, but the possibility is worth pausing on. A bear, curled in the cold and the dark, perhaps dreaming of salmon rivers, of berry slopes in August sun, of the smell of spring mud and the sound of meltwater. The inner life of a sleeping animal is one of the sealed rooms of biology, a place we know exists, but cannot fully enter. Perhaps the bear dreams of the world it will return to. Perhaps it does not. Either way, it breathes, slowly and very slowly, and the months pass, like a long, dark exhalation. Polar bears face perhaps the most acute conservation challenge of any bear species today. The Arctic sea ice that is essential to their survival has been declining steadily in extent and thickness. Sea ice forms later in autumn and breaks up earlier in spring than it did even a few decades ago. The windows during which polar bears can hunt seals on the ice are shrinking. Bears that cannot build sufficient fat reserves during the hunting season enter the ice-free summer months with less energy, less resilience, less capacity to survive, a long period without food. Female bears in poor condition are less likely to successfully raise cubs. Cub survival rates in the worst affected populations have fallen. The population of polar bears in Hudson Bay, one of the southernmost populations, has declined by roughly 30%. Since the 1980s, the polar bear's story is still being written. It is not finished yet, and the ending depends, at least in part, on choices that are still being made. There are parts of the world where bears and people have found a way to live alongside each other, with a degree of mutual acceptance. In Finland and Sweden, where brown bear populations have recovered well, there is a long tradition of living in bear country, with a kind of practical equanimity. Bears are respected and given space. Livestock are managed to reduce conflict, and the presence of bears in the forest is treated as a fact of life, sometimes an inconvenience, but also a source of quiet pride. In parts of Japan, where the Asiatic black bear and the Ussuri brown bear live, in forested mountainous areas, the relationship between bears and people is complicated but ancient, woven into local culture and legend for centuries. The communities that have lived longest with bears have developed the most nuanced understanding of them, not as monsters and not as harmless, but as real animals with real needs and real behaviors that can be learned and respected. Coexistence is always a practice, not an achievement. It requires ongoing attention and ongoing willingness. A bear's life follows a rhythm that is almost musical in its regularity. The long stillness of winter, the tentative emergence of early spring, the wide-ranging foraging of summer, the urgent eating of autumn, and then the stillness again. Each year, the same general shape, but never exactly the same, because the seasons are never quite the same. The year is never identical to the last, and the bear itself is always slightly different from the one it was before, carrying new experience, new memories, new scars and worn places from another year of living. The rhythm is ancient. The rhythm is shared with every bear that has ever walked this particular part of the world, stretching back before the last ice age, before the forest was this particular forest, before the river ran in quite this channel. The same rhythm, the same pull toward the cold and the dark, the same emergence into the light. The bear has a large and well-developed brain, relative to its body size, among the larger in the carnivore order, to which it taxonomically belongs. This brain size is associated with learning capacity and behavioral flexibility. A bear that encounters a new kind of problem is more likely to solve it through active investigation than to give up and move on. This is partly why bear-proof containers are such an ongoing engineering challenge in national parks. A bear that has an hour to spend on a cooler and the motivation of strong food smell will test every part of it with the methodical determination of a creature that has all day and nothing else to do. Containers certified as bear-resistant must pass field tests with actual bears. The testing bears are among the most useful and most determined quality assurance testers in any industry. The standards are set by what a bear can open in a set period of time. And the bears, it turns out, are very good at their job. The relationship between a mother bear and her cubs is one of the more extended periods of maternal care in the mammal world. Brown bear cubs typically stay with their mother for 1.5 to 3 years, depending on the population and the individual. During this time, the mother does not mate. Her reproductive cycle is on hold for as long as she is raising young. This is a significant investment, given that female brown bears typically begin reproducing between 5 and 7 years of age and have relatively few litters over a lifetime. A female bear that lives to 25 may raise only 5 or 6 litters of cubs in her entire life. Each litter matters enormously, not just to her, but to the population as a whole. The slow reproductive rate of bears is one of the reasons that bear populations recover slowly from hunting pressure and habitat loss. A species that produces cubs rarely and slowly cannot easily make up for large losses. The mother bear and the conservation biologist share a concern, in their different ways, about the same arithmetic. One of the more quietly extraordinary things about bears is how much they vary individually. Not just between species, but within species, within populations, individual to individual. Some bears are bold and curious. Others are cautious to the point of shyness. Some are efficient, practical foragers who move steadily through the landscape. Others seem to spend time exploring, investigating things that have nothing to do with food. Some female bears are highly tolerant of other bears near their cubs. Others are ferociously exclusive. Individual bears have individual personalities, and those personalities are observable to anyone who spends enough time watching. Wildlife researchers who study the same bear populations over many years come to know particular individuals well, to recognize their habits and preferences, their tendencies and their quirks. The bear that always uses a particular crossing point. The bear that consistently investigates new objects for twice as long as any other bear in the area. The bear that plays more in adulthood than any bear of its age has any apparent reason to. An animal that has preferences and habits and characteristic ways of being in the world is an individual, whatever language we use, to describe that individuality. When bears emerge from the den in spring, the first few days are a kind of gradual awakening. They are often groggy, moving slowly, blinking at the light. They may stay close to the den entrance for a day or two, occasionally retreating back inside, not quite ready to commit to the world. Their body temperature, which dropped during torpor, is gradually normalizing. Their heart rate is rising back toward its active range. Their digestive system, dormant for months, is waking up again. The first thing many bears do on emerging is eat snow. Snow, and then perhaps some early spring grass, and then the slow expansion of appetite as the gut remembers what it is for. There is a phrase sometimes used about this period: walking hibernation. The bear is moving, but not yet fully active, carrying the slowness of winter in its gait and its gaze for another week or more after leaving the den. Waking up slowly, one day at a time, into a world that is also slowly waking. The bear in mythology and story has played the role of the wild, the power beyond civilization, the force that exists whether we want it to or not. In the story of Goldilocks, often dismissed as a simple children's tale, the bears are the rightful owners of the house that is invaded. They return, and the intruder flees. The story is, in a quiet way, about the consequences of entering a space that does not belong to you. The bears in the story are not threatening. They are simply there, arriving at their own home to find it disturbed. There is a version of that story that is not about bears and a girl, but about the wild world and human encroachment. The bears come home. The thing that was there without permission is gone. The house, the forest, the territory belongs to the ones who were there first. The sound of a forest at night in bear country has a particular quality to it. The sounds you hear are familiar. Wind in the trees, a distant creak, an owl, the creak and settle of old wood. But knowing that a bear might be moving, somewhere in the darkness beyond what you can see, changes the quality of your listening. You become more careful. You hear more. Every sound carries a weight it might not otherwise have. This is not fear, exactly. Or not always. It is something more like awareness, a heightening of attention. That is itself a kind of gift. We live in a world where most of us, most of the time, do not need to listen that carefully. The presence of a bear in the dark asks you to be present in a way that the ordinary, managed landscape almost never does. There is something valuable in that asking, even when you do not seek it, even when all you wanted was a quiet walk. The bear's relationship to water extends beyond fishing. Brown bears are well known for their use of rivers, for cooling and bathing in summer heat. They will wade into rivers and lakes, up to their shoulders, standing still in the current, or rolling in shallow water, or simply sitting in a pool on a warm day. Young bears play in water with particular enthusiasm, splashing and wrestling, and occasionally submerging entirely. Water is not just a resource for bears. It is a place of activity, of social behavior, of the particular kind of relief that only immersion in cold moving water can provide on a hot day. A bear in a river on a summer afternoon, sitting chest deep in the current, with its eyes half closed, is an image of something that looks very much like contentment. Whatever that means. For a bear, it looks, from the outside, much like what it means for us. The sloth bear's maternal behavior is notable among bears for one unusual feature. Female sloth bears carry their cubs on their backs. This is almost unique among bears, and is actually uncommon among mammals generally. The cubs cling to the mother's long fur and ride on her back as she moves through the forest. They may ride this way for the first few months of life, descending when they are old enough, and the situation is calm enough to allow exploration on the ground. The sight of a sloth bear moving through the undergrowth with 2 or 3 small bears clinging to its back is one of the more unusual images in the animal kingdom. It also makes the sloth bear's already shaggy and somewhat chaotic appearance even more difficult to pass at first glance. A bear that carries its young. A body that becomes, for a brief period of life, a vehicle for the next generation. Warm and moving and covered in fur, the safest place in the whole forest. Bears have a role in seed dispersal that is often underappreciated. When a bear eats berries, it may eat thousands of them in a single day. The seeds pass through the digestive system intact, deposited in the bear's droppings, often some distance from the original plant. The droppings themselves, provide a nutrient-rich environment for the germinating seed. Many of the plants in bear country have seeds shaped and sized to pass through a bear's gut without damage, an evolutionary accommodation to the animal's dietary habits. The berry depends on the bear to distribute itself through the landscape. The bear depends on the berry for the calories it needs to survive. And the whole ecosystem depends on this exchange to maintain the diversity and distribution of its plant communities. The bear, eating its berries in the late summer sun, is performing a kind of gardening it has never been asked to do and will never take credit for. In the human imagination, the bear occupies a peculiar position. It is one of the few large wild animals that has also been successfully domesticated, at least in the sense of being tamed enough to live alongside people. Dancing bears, circus bears, the trained bears of ancient Rome, and medieval Europe, the performing bears of Asia, even the very recent history of keeping bear cubs as pets before they became too large. All of these speak to a human desire to keep the wild nearby, to have the power and presence of the bear within reach. And yet the bear resists full domestication in a way that dogs and cats do not. It remains wild at some level that cannot be trained away. It retains its nature, regardless of circumstance. Perhaps this is part of what draws us to it. The sense that here is a creature that cannot fully be made into something else, that holds on to its bareness in the face of any amount of human effort to reshape it. There is a kind of integrity in that, and we recognize it, even when we do not name it. Bear cubs are born with a fine, sparse coating of fur that thickens rapidly in the first weeks of life. Their eyes open at around 4 to 6 weeks. In those early weeks, while still in the den, they are entirely dependent on the mother for warmth, nutrition, and stimulation. The mother cleans them frequently, licking them in a way that also stimulates circulation and helps maintain their body temperature. As they grow, the cubs begin to explore the den, to wrestle with each other, to nurse frequently. By the time spring arrives and they leave the den, they are walking well, though their movements are still wobbly and uncoordinated compared to what they will become. The first real spring, the first real sunlight, the first real earth beneath their new paws. A beginning that arrives out of the deep dark of a winter they will not remember, but that made them. The Kodiak bear deserves a mention, as it is the largest subspecies of brown bear and one of the largest land carnivores on Earth. Kodiak bears live only on the Kodiak archipelago, off the coast of Alaska, a cluster of islands where they have lived in isolation from mainland brown bears for roughly 12,000 years. This isolation, combined with an extraordinarily rich food supply, particularly the salmon runs that fill the rivers of the islands each year, has produced bears of remarkable size. A large male Kodiak bear can weigh over 1,500 pounds and stand over 10 feet when upright. Standing beside one would be an experience difficult to adequately describe. The sheer volume of the animal, the depth of its chest, the width of its head, the size of its paws, these things operate on a scale that the human body recognizes before the mind catches up. And yet Kodiak bears, like most brown bears, are fundamentally interested in eating berries and fish and getting enough fat to sleep through the winter. All that size in service of the most ordinary needs. A vast and gentle engine running on salmon and blueberries. The commode bear, sometimes called the spirit bear, is worth returning to here because its story has a particularly quiet beauty to it. It is an American black bear, genetically indistinguishable in almost every way from its dark-coated relatives. But a recessive gene, inherited from both parents, produces a coat of pale, creamy white. About 1 in every 10 black bears in the coastal forests of British Columbia carries this coloration. The Tsimshian people have lived alongside this bear for generations and have a story about it. That raven made 1 in every 10 bears white, as a reminder of the time of ice, the glaciers that once covered the land, preserved in the bear's color, forever. The spirit bear fishes in the same rivers as its dark relatives, eats the same berries, climbs the same old-growth cedars. But there is something in the image of a white bear moving through the dark green of a coastal rainforest that stops the breath for a moment. A ghost, a remnant, a memory of ice, walking among the trees, eating blackberries in the rain. The grizzly bear's diet changes not just season by season, but hour by hour across the face of a single day. In the early morning, a bear might be moving across a hillside, grazing on green sedges and clover in the cool, low light. By midday, the same bear might be digging for ground squirrels in a dry, open slope, working methodically through the crumbling earth. In late afternoon, it might make its way down to a river and spend several hours fishing. And in the long summer twilight, it might circle back to the berry patches, moving from bush to bush in a slow, concentrated trance of eating. The bear's day is almost entirely structured around finding and consuming food, and yet there is nothing frantic about it. It moves through its foraging with a thoroughness and patience that is almost meditative. It finishes one thing before moving to the next. It does not rush. It does not skip. It simply eats its way through the day with a kind of even, unhurried attention that the day seems to ask of it. The bear's life, seen from a distance, is a long, slow practice of presence. There is a detail about bear tracks that surprises many people when they first notice it. A bear, walking normally, does not place its hind foot in the same spot as its front foot, the way some animals do. Instead, its hind foot lands slightly in front of the print left by the front foot. This creates a characteristic paired track pattern that is distinctive once you know to look for it. In snow or mud, bear tracks can be extraordinary in their detail. The 5 toes, the broad pad, the claw marks extending from each toe, the curve of the heel. A large grizzly's front paw print can be as wide as a dinner plate. When you see a track like that, pressed into fresh mud beside a river, there is a moment before intellectual understanding catches up, where the body simply responds to the reality of the size of the animal that made it. The track is an impression of an absence, the shape of where a bear was, still in the mud, long after the animal has moved on. All that remains is the mark of its passing, which is, perhaps, most of what any creature leaves. The bear's liver plays a central role in the metabolic changes of winter torpor. During the months of the den, the liver continues working steadily, processing the waste products of the body and recycling them in ways that prevent the buildup of toxins. A human who fasted for the same length of time would accumulate urea at levels that would eventually become dangerous. The bear's liver converts urea back into amino acids and uses them to build proteins. It is a closed system, elegant and self-sustaining, running on fat reserves and its own chemical ingenuity. Researchers studying this process have found it relevant to the treatment of kidney disease, in which the buildup of urea is one of the primary dangers. The bear's body has evolved a solution to a problem that medicine is still working to fully solve. It does this not through technology or deliberate innovation, but through millions of years of small adjustments, each one a slightly better answer to the question of how to stay alive through a long, cold darkness. Brown bears in the wild are profoundly shaped by the landscapes they inhabit. A brown bear in coastal Alaska, with access to rich salmon runs and abundant vegetation, will be significantly larger than a brown bear in the interior of Russia, living on a leaner diet. The same species, the same biology, but the world they live in determines so much of what they become. This environmental plasticity, the capacity to grow larger or smaller, to shift the timing of hibernation, to broaden or narrow the diet, depending on what the local world provides, is part of what has made brown bears so successful across such an enormous range. They are not locked into a single strategy. They adjust. They learn. They make the best of what is available. This is sometimes called ecological flexibility, and it is one of the more reliable predictors of a species' long-term survival. The animals that will still be here in 1,000 years are likely to be the ones that can adapt to a changing world. And bears, by temperament and by biology, are well placed for that long game. In the forests of the Great Smoky Mountains, American black bears have developed a relationship with human visitors. that is a study in adaptation and complexity. The park sees millions of visitors a year, and the bears have learned to live within and around that human presence. Some bears in the park have become highly efficient at exploiting the food opportunities that human visitors inadvertently provide. Others remain largely in the backcountry, wild in a way that visitors rarely witness. The park manages this relationship carefully, because a bear that associates people with food is a bear at risk. The management challenge is essentially this: how do you maintain a wild, naturally behaving bear population in a landscape that also receives enormous numbers of people? There is no perfect answer, but the effort is ongoing, and the bears are still there, still wild enough to be bears, still moving through the old forests in their unhurried way, still teaching their cubs the roots and resources their mothers taught them. The park holds them, not perfectly, but faithfully, and the bears keep choosing to stay. The scientific study of bears has undergone a quiet revolution in recent decades with the development of new tracking technology. Satellite GPS collars have allowed researchers to follow individual bears continuously through their annual movements, gathering data on the distances they travel, the habitats they use, the timing of their activities. What has emerged from this data is a picture of bear lives that is far more complex and individualized than earlier research had suggested. One bear in a study population might travel hundreds of miles in a season. Another in the same population might stay within a relatively small area. The range and movement patterns of individual bears are highly variable, shaped by their own history, their own personality, and the particular conditions of their own lives. Drone technology has added another dimension, allowing researchers to observe bears from above, without disturbing them, watching behaviors that ground-based observation would miss entirely. The picture of the bear that science is building is richer and more detailed with every passing year. And still, the bear seems always to be a little more than the picture can hold. Asiatic black bears are known for their skill at finding and raiding beehives. In much the same way as sun bears, though they are larger and approach the task differently. They will climb trees to find hives, or tear apart old logs and stumps, where bees have made their home. The bees, naturally, object to this. But a bear covered in thick fur can endure a level of stinging that would drive away most other animals. The eyes are the most vulnerable part. Bears raiding hives will sometimes blink rapidly and shake their heads when bees cluster around the face, but they rarely retreat quickly. The honey and the larvae inside the hive are worth the temporary discomfort. Honey is remarkably calorie-dense, and the larvae inside the comb are rich in protein and fat. The bear's tolerance for bee stings, in pursuit of that reward, is another expression of its fundamental quality. Patience in pursuit of something worth having, a willingness to endure difficulty for a sufficient reward. we might recognize that if we sat with it long enough. The question of bear intelligence is closely tied to the question of bear individuality. Because bears can learn, and because different bears learn different things, and learn them at different rates, the behavior of individuals within a population can diverge significantly over time. A bear that has learned to open a particular type of lock knows something that another bear does not. A bear that has discovered a productive but hidden foraging area carries information that gives it an advantage in the competition for resources. In a social species, this kind of learned knowledge can spread through a population. In a largely solitary species like the bear, it is more often individual, held by the animal that found it, and passed on, if at all, only to the cubs, who followed closely enough to observe. Each bear is, in some real sense, its own library, carrying a particular collection of knowledge, a particular set of strategies, assembled through its own specific life and not available elsewhere. When an old bear dies, something irreplaceable is lost, not just an individual, but a particular accumulation of knowing. The cave paintings of Western Europe, some of them 30,000 years old or older, include images of bears. At Chauvet Cave in France, one of the oldest known painted caves in the world, there are cave bear skulls placed on rocks in the interior. The paintings at Chauvet include lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, and bears, rendered with a confidence and sensitivity that is breathtaking even now. The people who made these images lived alongside cave bears, competed with them for space in these very caves, and knew them in an intimate and daily way that we cannot fully imagine. What they felt toward the bear is beyond our ability to know precisely. But the fact that they painted it with such care and attention suggests that it mattered to them, that it held a place in their world, that went beyond simple danger or simple food. The paintings are a form of attention, the oldest form we know. Look, this thing, this living thing, it is worth the effort of making its shape last. There is a moment in late summer when the huckleberry slopes of the northern Rockies are covered in bears. Not together exactly, not a gathering as it is at the salmon rivers, but spread across the hillside in loose proximity, each one focused on the berries underfoot. You can see them moving slowly through the low, dark-leafed bushes, stopping often, heads down, the sound of their eating, quiet against the bigger quiet of the mountain. Mother bears with cubs move across those slopes. Old solitary males move alone. Young bears, dispersed from their mothers in the last year or two, move uncertainly, but purposefully through the berry fields. All of them eating, all of them building the layer of fat that will carry them through winter. The whole hillside, in those late August weeks, is the site of a slow, quiet, massive labor. And overhead, the sky is the particular deep blue of high summer at its end, already beginning to carry the first cold edge of what is coming. The bears know it. Their bodies feel it. And they eat on, berry by berry, into the shortening afternoons. The sun bear is also notable for something about its face that may surprise you. It can make an extraordinary range of facial expressions, far more than most bears. When interacting with other sun bears, it moves its face in ways that mirror the expressions of the bear it is with. If one sun bear makes a particular open-mouthed play face, another sun bear may copy it almost exactly, apparently to signal shared intention or mutual recognition. This facial mimicry is a sophisticated social behavior. It means that the animal is not just responding to what another animal does, but specifically copying the expression of the face as a form of communication. The behavior was documented in the early 21st century and added to a short list of species known to engage in facial mimicry. That list included great apes, certain dog breeds in interaction with humans, and now the smallest of the bears, reading faces in the soft light of a tropical forest. A bear that watches your face and answers it with its own. American black bears have a geographic range that is remarkable for its variety. They live in the boreal forests of Canada and in the subtropical forests of Florida. They live in the hardwood forests of the Appalachians and in the chaparral and oak woodlands of California. They live in the high pine forests of the Rocky Mountains and in the swamps of Louisiana. This range of habitat reflects the same ecological flexibility that characterizes many successful bear species. The black bear adapts its diet and behavior to whatever the local landscape provides, which means that a black bear in Florida and a black bear in British Columbia may lead very different lives, despite belonging to the same species. The Florida black bear eats a great deal of sour palmetto berries, cabbage palm fruits, and the occasional alligator egg. The British Columbia black bear eats salmon, huckleberries, and glacier lily bulbs. Two bears, one species, two entirely different answers to the question of what to eat for dinner. Something that is easy to overlook about bears in winter is how precisely calibrated their physiology is to the length of the dormant period. A bear that enters the den too early, before its fat stores are sufficient, risks running out of fuel before spring. A bear that enters too late may have already burned off some of the fat it needed, trying to keep warm in early winter conditions. The timing of den entry is therefore a finely tuned biological decision, driven by hormonal signals, but responsive to environmental conditions. In years when food is abundant late in the season, bears may delay den entry by several weeks to take advantage of the extra foraging time. In years when snow comes early, they may den sooner. The body and the world are in constant dialogue, each informing the other, adjusting and readjusting as the season develops. The bear does not decide this consciously, but the body knows. The body is always making calculations we are not aware of, assessing the present against what is coming, preparing for what it cannot yet see. Our bodies do this too, in their own way, their own ancient calibration, running quietly. Beneath everything, we think and feel. The brown bear populations of the Carpathian Mountains in Central Europe are among the most studied in the world. Romania, in particular, holds the largest population of brown bears in Europe, outside of Russia, with several thousand individuals living in the forested mountain ranges. These bears have adapted to a densely human landscape, moving through a patchwork of forests and farmland, using forest corridors to travel between larger patches of intact habitat. The relationship between these bears and the rural communities that live alongside them is complex, including genuine conflict over livestock predation and crop raiding, alongside a long tradition of rural communities that have always known bears as neighbors. Conservation in these landscapes is not the simple preservation of a wilderness. It is the much harder work of finding ways for people and bears to share the same land with something approaching mutual tolerance. The Carpathians are a place where that work is ongoing, imperfect, sometimes contentious, and genuinely necessary. The polar bear, in the traditional understanding of the Inuit peoples of the Arctic, is not merely an animal. It is Nanook, a being of great spiritual significance, the master of bears, a figure whose spirit demands respect. The Inuit relationship with polar bears was one of intimate knowledge, built over thousands of years of living in the same landscape. Hunters who took polar bears followed careful protocols of respect, treating the bear's spirit with the same consideration as any powerful being. The bear's bones were not discarded carelessly, but handled with intention. Its skull sometimes returned to the sea, so that the spirit could return and be born again. This worldview holds the bear in a relationship of reciprocity with the humans who hunt it, neither simply below them in a hierarchy of value, nor simply above, but in a relationship of mutual dependence and mutual obligation. It is a philosophy shaped by millennia of living in the Arctic, where survival depends on an honest understanding of who else is living there. When you think about what it would mean to be a bear, even briefly and imperfectly, certain things shift. To have a nose that reads the world in a language of scent, so complex and layered, that the air around you is not empty but full. To have a memory so precise that you return to the same berry slope year after year, not because you are following directions, but because you remember it, the exact contour of the land, the smell of that particular hillside in August, the way the light falls across it. In late afternoon, to sleep for 5 months, and wake not hungry exactly, but ready, the body already turning back toward its rhythms, before the mind has fully caught up. To stand in a cold river and wait with perfect patience for a silver shape to pass within reach. To move through a forest at night and know, precisely and without effort, where you are. There is something in that imagining that is restful. A life fully embedded in a place, fully present to its seasons, fully itself, without distraction. The bear does not wonder what else it might be. It is simply what it is, completely in the present moment of its life. Bears have been observed engaging in what researchers sometimes call tool-adjacent behavior. A brown bear in Alaska was filmed using a barnacle-covered rock as a scrubbing tool, picking it up repeatedly and rubbing it across its face. Sun bears have been observed using sticks to extract insects from narrow gaps in wood, though this is rare and has not been confirmed, as deliberate tool use. In a scientific sense, American black bears have been seen moving objects to gain access to food, a simple but genuine form of environmental manipulation. Tool use, in its strictest definition, requires that the animal use an external object to achieve something it could not otherwise do. Whether bears fully meet this definition is a matter of careful ongoing debate. But the behavior exists, and it exists on a continuum that blurs the line between solving a problem with your body and solving it with the world around you. The bear, picking up a stone, is in some sense asking, "What can this do that I cannot do alone?" And that question, however simply it is being asked, is not nothing. As the night deepens, and this long, slow journey through the world of bears begins to find its way towards stillness, it is worth pausing on a simple thing. Bears exist. Right now, as you listen, as you breathe, as the room holds you in its quiet, bears are somewhere in the world. A polar bear on the sea ice, under a sky full of stars, lifting its black nose to a wind that carries everything to it. A panda in a mountain bamboo grove, sitting in the mist, pulling another stalk toward itself. A brown bear cub asleep in a den, somewhere deep in a forest, curled against its sleeping mother, both of them breathing slow. A black bear in the southern Appalachians, moving through a moonlit clearing, nose to the ground, reading everything the night has laid down. A sun bear in the darkness of a Malaysian forest, still and watchful, in a tree. All of them there, all of them breathing, all of them following the pull of their own lives through a world that is very old. We began with the length of time bears have been on this earth, and it is worth returning to that. One final time, 38 million years of bear ancestors, slowly changing, slowly becoming. All that time of survival, of seasons and ice ages and vast shifts in the land, and here they still are. 8 kinds of them, in 8 different corners of the world, each one a different solution to the same ancient question of how to live. And we are here too, a much younger species, sharing the world with them, for a much shorter time, still working out how to do it well. There is something humbling about being in the company of bears. Not because they are stronger or fiercer, though they are both, but because they have been doing this for so much longer than we have, adapting and surviving through changes we cannot quite imagine, and still here, still breathing, still eating berries in late summer, and sleeping through the winter, and bringing cubs into a cold world, and teaching them how to live in it. Still here. After all of that, still here. And now the night has done its work. The last thought settles like a leaf onto still water. If you are still with us, you have traveled a long way tonight, through the world of bears, through forests and ice and bamboo groves, and the quiet dark of hillside dens. All of that is still there, all of it still happening, out in the dark, beyond the walls of the room you are in. And you are here, still and warm and resting, your breathing slow, your body doing its patient, ancient work of rest and renewal. Let your thoughts go now, the way the bears let the cold of winter come, without resistance, without urgency. Let the darkness be comfortable. Let the quiet be enough. If your eyes are still open, you can close them now. There is nothing left to do tonight, but rest. Somewhere, a bear is doing exactly the same. Its breath is slow. Its body is warm. The world is old and patient and very, very still.